What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Steve.
I'm Lindsay.
Today we're going to be checking out the real reason London's skyscrapers are oddly shaped.
I didn't know they were oddly shaped.
I can picture some very interesting looking buildings when I've seen images of the London skyline.
The only one I can think of is the Shard.
The Shard.
Didn't you look at that?
We actually checked out the Shard itself, learned about it, and it's a beautiful building, honestly.
Yeah, it was.
But I haven't really looked at other individual buildings, but I can picture them for some reason, some very interesting shaped buildings.
It's very fuzzy in my mind. I don't have a good picture of the London skyline.
Well, I guess you're going to learn about it now.
I guess I am.
So guys, we're going to just quit rambling and jump in here and check out why the London skyscrapers are oddly shaped.
The Gherkin.
The Gherkin.
The Cheesegrater.
The Cheesegrater.
The Shard.
The Shard.
These are the nicknames that Londoners have affectionately given to some of their newest skyscrapers. These quirky nicknames reflect their unusual shapes. Yes, these styles are partly an aesthetic choice, but something more concrete influenced their design. During the early 1900s, American skyscrapers paved the way for what tall buildings would look like for decades to come. By mid-century, the rectangular modern box design dominated skylines. It wasn't until the 1950s that Europe began scaling its structures to significant heights. Most were wider in profile and topped with spires, and most tended to be smaller than their North American counterparts.
Like, why can't we have more buildings like this?
I don't know, they're beautiful.
You know, it's like back in the day, you go back before modern times, and they just appreciated beauty more. Nowadays, it seems like it's built, they're just not as interesting looking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We talked about this in the past, and it's not just like skyscrapers, but it's also all buildings, whether it's cathedrals or...
The details of things just aren't there.
Even courthouses don't look as nice as they used to.
Parts.
London didn't start building skyscrapers until the 1980s.
Tower 42 was completed in 1981. London's first skyscraper stands at 600 feet and was designed to reflect the NatWest Bank logo, which it was initially home to. But it wasn't until 1991 that the next skyscraper was built. At 800 feet, One Canada Square remained the tallest building in the UK for 20 years.
Wow.
20 years.
During the 2000s,
One
London
Canada
saw
Square.
a dramatic increase in skyscrapers.
And now,
Wow.
this is what the iconic London skyline looks like.
All right, this might be your first time actually getting a look at the London skyline.
It is, especially like in depth. Like,
right.
Usually it's from way of a distance, and
this is kind of what I was picturing in my head when I was saying I can kind of picture these oddly shaped buildings in the London skyline. I really haven't looked in depth at it, but I've just seen it in passing in certain videos or whatnot. And as you can see here, I think you'll agree that they are they're very interesting shaped.
futuristic.
Yeah, I'd say that. Even this right here.
Yeah.
You see that? But yes, all together. Where's the Cheesegrater? Is that this right here?
Yeah, I think so.
So there's
and
Cheesegrater.
It's off on its own.
There's the Shard, which I remember talking about how it was interesting how it kind of came up like,
and it's open.
yeah, at the top. And then here's the Gherkin, right?
It looks like a rocket to me.
Yeah, it kind of does. Are they coming up from the perspective of a pickle? Is that what?
Yeah, you guys call pickles gherkins, right? So
Yeah, I believe
think
so.
that's why, but to me it looks like a rocket.
And was this that first skyscraper they were just
don't
talking
know.
about? Or was it
I
the
don't think
second
it
one that was
is.
built in 1991? Maybe it's not either. It kind of reminds me of one of the ones we just saw.
Not sure.
But I'm curious of what this is right here.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely some interesting shaped
It's like they
skyscrapers.
don't belong or something. Like they just popped up at a...
Yeah, it's like they were just transplanted there, and they don't look similar to a lot of the other buildings in the skyline here.
Yeah.
So why such unique designs? Well, London's streets play a role.
Look at that, so beautiful.
The City of London, as I say, is a historic centre, and it is based on a medieval plan, which means small plots of land, funny shaped plans, and so that meant that the actual shape of the building was going to be impacted.
The skyline has also been a playground for experimental architects.
There was a chief planner in the city, and his name was Peter Rees, and he will admit that he would get bored very easily. He didn't want to see the same old buildings turning up every time, and he had quite a hand in pushing through interesting buildings.
While the skyline is partly a result of tight plots of
Yeah,
land and a
look at this. Look at this right here. It's like, that is so interesting. I like it. I like the interesting shape stuff.
I like it, but at the same time, I like the old style of architecture.
No, I'm not comparing it to the old stuff. They're not going to, build a skyscraper to look like an old cathedral. But what I'm getting at is what I like that I like the Victorian architecture and just the medieval stuff in general. But like I'm talking about comparing these skyscrapers to the modern, just boxy buildings.
That's true. If I had to look at this versus just the tall rectangular blocks.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree.
So much more interesting.
Visually,
it gives the skyline character, and I like that.
Tex, one building built 400 years ago has arguably been the most influential. During the 17th century, the London skyline mainly consisted of church spires. The largest one being St. Paul's Cathedral at 460 feet tall. It was a landmark of the city and a popular spot for gatherings such as speeches, sporting events, and trade. But on a hot summer day in 1666, a fire broke out at a local bakery.
No.
London had not seen rain for weeks, and the blaze rapidly spread throughout the city. Efforts to contain the flames mostly failed, and much of the city was destroyed, including the iconic St. Paul's Cathedral.
That's sad.
Oh, man.
That's really
The disaster
sad.
is now known as the Great Fire of London.
I've heard of it.
I've heard of that too.
But I've never looked into it.
Sought to rebuild the city. The construction of the new St. Paul's began in 1675 and was completed in 1711.
Wow.
As development of the city continued, the cathedral remained dominant on the London horizon.
Then in 1861, the Tulip Street fire killed the chief of fire. This led to a call for a limit in building height for fire safety. However, it wasn't the fear of fire that made for the most change.
In 1889, workers completed construction on a 130-foot tall residential building near Buckingham Palace. It was viewed as a blemish on London's skyline of chimneys and church spires. Queen Victoria objected to it as it blocked her view of Buckingham Palace. Following a stint of bad press, the city established the London Building Act in 1894, stating that any new building should not be erected of or subsequently increased to a greater height of 80 feet exclusive of 2 stories and the roof.
Wow. So that was 1894. So obviously that act went, it ended at some point.
Wow.
They changed it or something.
So they got rid of the ability to make a skyscraper, basically.
Yeah, which they hadn't really done at that point, obviously. But they did say the first skyscraper came along. I forgot what year they said, but it was pretty recently.
Yeah. I think it was the 80s.
Yeah, I think it was like 81, right? Or we think of the second one. Either way, no, the second was in the 90s, right? So up until it looks like the early 80s, they didn't have anything taller than some church steeples, I guess. But I would have assumed it would have been Westminster Abbey that was the most, like, instead of the St. Paul's Cathedral. Mm-hmm. I don't, maybe it wasn't as high. I don't know how high Westminster Abbey is. But something else I'm curious about, guys, is like, I know you guys build with a lot of stone in the UK, right? And so I wouldn't have thought the Great Fire would have done as much damage as it seems to have done, unless there was a ton of wood.
Interesting point.
So let us know in the comments, guys. Back in the day, was more wood used than we actually think, or is currently used?
Probably more trees.
Yeah, it probably was back in the day. Yeah.
But architects cleverly got around the height limitation by adding steps back from the facade to add an extra 2 or 3 stories, reaching a total height of 100 feet. And by the 1930s, several buildings surpassed the 80-foot limit.
But people were picking up on this trick. People like W. Godfrey Allen. Allen was appointed surveyor to the St. Paul's Cathedral in 1931, and he wasn't too fond of the newly crowded skyline.
The view from Blackfriars Bridge has been spoiled by the hideous new telephone exchange building in front of Queen Victoria Street. He put together a series of photographs that displayed how the London Building Act was limiting the views around the cathedral. He then manipulated the photos to show what buildings of up to 100 feet would look like around St. Paul's Cathedral.
Wow.
Allen's argument resulted in a gentleman's agreement called St. Paul's Heights that would protect the vistas of the dome. The agreement outlined 8 corridors throughout London in which the cathedral is to be visible from. One of these corridors allows the cathedral to be seen from King Henry's Mound 10 miles away.
King Henry's
According
Mound.
to the London Views Management Network, there are a total of 13 protected corridors that include other landmarks like the Palace of Westminster and the Tower of London. The agreement was officially put into practice in 1938 and later given policy status in 1989.
That's so recent.
In 1992, architect Norman Foster began designing a building called Millennium Tower.
However, the original design was quite bulky and tall at 1,265 feet. Concerns grew that it would block out the protective views of St. Paul's. So Foster scaled down the building to
What?
590 feet, and the design was changed.
That's so different.
Completed in 2003, and now sits at 30 St. Mary Axe and is informally known as the Gherkin.
The Gherkin.
Cucumber-like shape. And while the original height was affected by St. Paul's, its unusual shape is attributed to an additional factor.
It was designed like that in order to allow the wind to around
Oh.
it without creating very windy spaces at ground level. So
That's smart.
That is smart.
was shaped very much by the climatic effects of that particular part of
I
the city.
appreciate round buildings.
Now,
I like
the Gherkin
that.
has become a defining part of the London skyline, and residents regard it as an important landmark of the city. In 2000, architects unveiled a proposal for a 1,312-foot tower.
That's the Shard, right?
Or the
building would pierce the
Cheesegrater.
London
I'm
skyline
not
with
sure.
a
Kind of
pyramid-like
looks like the
shape.
Shard. I'm not
Plans
sure.
were slowed in 2003 when a public inquiry was launched in order to investigate the impact it would have on the corridors.
Similar to the Gherkin, the height of the building would compete with the Cathedral. But the Greater London Authority gave it the go-ahead because of its unique shape that would allow for unobstructed views of St. Paul's.
The height was reduced from
Shard.
1,312 feet to 1,016 feet. The opaque exterior was replaced with transparent glass, and the pyramid-like shape was stretched more vertically so that the top was as slender as possible. The final design was placed tightly between two corridors in order to maximize its space. And in 2013, the Shard
It's really a beautiful building.
Yeah.
But perhaps one building was influenced more by St. Paul's Cathedral than any other.
The Cheesegrater, the initial
The
design was
Cheesegrater.
a vertical building. But as you look from a very specific point, which is protected, the view of the building and your view of the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral bumped into each other. So it was thought that what they needed to do visually to separate out the dome from the tall building, they came up with the idea of bringing the front of the building back so that as you looked from a point...
Okay, that makes total sense. Why it's shaped that way now.
You wouldn't see the building. So that meant that you had a big
Look
triangle.
at that.
Hold on.
That's so cool.
That is so cool. Wow. I can see why they call it a cheese grater, by the way. Mm-hmm. But it makes total sense. This is so interesting.
I appreciate that there
They're
was so
thoughtful.
much, that there was
Yeah.
so much thought put into unobstructed views from different vantage points.
Yeah.
Because that is important,
Yeah,
I
it is.
think.
I am a big believer in beauty in buildings and in landscapes, and it makes me sad when I look at the way we used to build, hundreds of years ago compared to now, and it's just like everything is lost as beauty in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, modern architecture has its beauty.
But obviously,
too,
I'm
in
not
a different way.
I'm not talking about these.
Yeah,
I'm
but
talking about just
drab,
the drab
cookie
blah.
cutter.
Just square rectangle building with no character.
Yeah.
It's really character is what I want to see in a building. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which these
Quirkiness.
character, just beauty, all that type of thing, which is what you see here,
And preserving the historical views, like they are doing in London.
But London isn't the only city shaped by protected vistas.
Vancouver, Canada has restrictions on buildings that preserve the views of the North Shore Mountains.
That's cool.
And in San Francisco, guidelines provide building height ranges depending on the topography in order to protect the views of open spaces
the bay.
and water.
Unlike these cities, London has no legal constraints. It is only policy.
But this policy obviously still dictates construction. In recent years, there has been pressure to change the regulations set by St. Paul's Heights. Some question the continued importance of protecting the cathedral.
Mango.
Buildings gain importance and lose importance throughout history, states Annie Hampston, the former City of London planning officer. And the Gherkin is quickly gaining in importance. Critics also argue that the protected views prevent the construction of much-needed housing. A 2018 study said 844,000 houses are needed in order to keep up with the growing population.
Wait, hold on. Is that London? No, surely not.
I don't know.
844,000. They can't be talking about just London. That's a lot of houses that are needed to supply a single city. I mean, London has a population, correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere around 9 million-ish people. So 844,000 houses are needed for not. That would make sense. I think surely you got to be thinking of the entire country.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Others say newly relaxed laws would increase housing cost. In theory, it would price out locals and bring in rich foreign investors instead. As London's skyscraper boom continues, St. Paul's Heights remains a deciding factor on their design. The Tulip, first proposed in 2018,
The
is
Tulip.
a controversial example. Although it was initially approved,
That looks cool.
Oh, that looks so cool, guys.
It almost some of these remind me of things you'd see in, is it Dubai, where they have all the cool
kind of, yeah.
architecture, like
Yeah.
this modern.
Now, I haven't looked at Dubai a lot, but something I've seen some of the buildings in passing, and they got the tallest building in the world there. I know, and
That looks really cool. Though.
It is.
So it sounds like maybe it wasn't approved.
I
But it was
remember.
initially, but
I remember a while back hearing about this thing that was going to be built in London. It was this beautiful like garden bridge, and I thought it was the greatest idea in the world. But a lot of people didn't in London area did not like the idea that we were going to spend money on that, which I can understand. You gotta figure out where the best place to spend money is. But that bridge, I wish I could remember what it was. I'd love to show you that, and you'd love it as well. But I love quirky buildings like this. Is so cool.
you imagine, like, I don't know if that's a restaurant up there or what
I'm sure.
that is,
I'm sure it probably is something like that. It would make
kinda
sense.
Scary.
I think it would be awesome.
It would be cool, but it would be a little
And what are these like?
orb thing.
Yeah, like is that just where you can come out to the window and see the view better
Ooh,
down,
that'd be
like more
scary.
3D kind of? I don't know. I like that though. That's really cool.
architects scrapped plans in 2019. An investigation.
Oh, look at the bubbles.
Harmed the protective views of the Tower of London, while also creating an unsafe pedestrian environment around the bottom of the tower. Now, city planners have launched an appeal against the decision.
Recently, however, the city did approve construction for a building that will potentially impede views.
A building dubbed the Cheesegrater 2
Cheesegrater
is
2.
656 feet away from the original Cheesegrater, despite backlash from St. Paul's. Unlike the Tulip, the committee believed that the design of the Cheesegrater 2 was an exciting enough addition to the skyline. So while controversies surrounding St. Paul's Heights still exist, London seems to be leaving the door open for change. What are your thoughts on London's oddly shaped skyscrapers?
I love it.
personally like
think
it.
it's cool. I wish they would approve the Tulip one. That one was
I do too. I know if you're in London, you might know more about it than we do, obviously. So you might be like,
but just
well,
visually speaking.
yeah,
I
just
think
visually
it's cool.
speaking, I like it. I like the idea because you do have a certain number of quirky looking buildings like the Gherkin, for example.
And it makes your skyline memorable.
Yes.
Like so many skylines, at least here in the US, I can't tell them apart because they all look so
They
similar.
all are just a bunch of
Yeah.
rectangle buildings or a bunch of square buildings. And it's like, this, look at that. That is so cool. If that was part of the skyline, right near the Gherkin, they kind of,
Yeah.
it looks like the Gherkin on top of this pole.
Yeah.
I really like that a lot.
A mini Gherkin.
Yeah, a mini. You got the Gherkin and the mini Gherkin. I do. I love that. I know a lot of people probably don't like that for one reason or another,
Yeah.
but I think creating a skyline with cool buildings like that is amazing. And the cool thing about a building like this, for example, is that it's very kind of narrow, like on a pole almost.
Right, it doesn't take up a lot of footprint.
It doesn't impede the view as much.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I like all these buildings, honestly. I think they're really cool. What do you think?
I agree.
Yeah. I look forward to going to some of these buildings. I definitely look forward to going to Deschard one day.
Yeah, you can go all the way up to the top, right?
Yeah.
And it's open up there.
Yeah.
Just freaky.
Not really a unique, like oddly shaped building, but there is the recent, I forgot what it's called. I've told you about it, where you can go up that elevator shaft in that new mall. It's like the old power plant. And it's elevator 109, I believe is what it's called. Something similar to that. And that is really cool. That is really cool, and something you need to see at some point. It's such a, you come up this shaft, and you're just coming up this shaft in this elevator, and all of a sudden you come up to the top, and it just opens up, and you got a 360 view of the skyline. You're way up there. I forgot how far up that was, but yeah, that was really cool. But at least to me, I hope they do something like this. I'd love to see that. That'd be a really awesome addition to the skyline. But guys, let us know in the comments what quirky stuff we should check out next, like similar to this. If you know of the bridge that was planned, that garden bridge, if you remember the name of it, let me know in the comments. I'd like to show Lindsay the concept that was created, but unfortunately was scrapped. And I believe it's because a lot of people didn't want taxpayer dollars wasted on it. I just thought, like, I can understand that, right? But on the surface, just from an outsider looking in, I think it would just be a really cool thing, you know? But
the benefits would outweigh.
Yeah, imagine a bridge. Imagine a big bridge, and along it you grow it up into this like garden park thing full of plants and trees and everything
like
else.
A greenery trail path.
Yeah.
Would it be like edible plants and?
Well, see, that would just even be cooler. Yeah, if you could grow edible plants on it. I mean, that's not really what this is about. It just kind of that type of vibe. Yeah. I'm very interested in all this type of thing, guys. So if you have anything interesting to share, please feel free to do so in the comments. But I think that's it for us today. Thank you so much for stopping by. Please click that like button. Feel free to drop your comments or suggestions about this video or others. And don't forget to smack down that subscribe button. Help us get to 100,000 subscribers, guys. Thanks so much. Till next time. Peace.
Bye.